And then I'm going to make Chad the host. Okay. And the link to the agenda is up on top. And the only thing that I ask is actually, hi, Avery. No, you're not Avery. Why do you have Avery's name on your stuff? Sarah, did you just get her stuff? Her login?
I don't know. We changed our Zoom information, so who knows? We've been having technical issues with Zoom.
So I'm really happy to see all of you, and then I'm going to leave you. But you are in really great hands. So Chad is now the host. Do you have a popcorn question, Volto, for everyone?
Oops, I don't have a popcorn question, but we can make up one. So
let's make up one. Does anybody have a good popcorn question?
How about what movie would you have voted for the best, for the Oscar?
I didn't.
Not that I saw all of them or anything, but other people may have.
Yeah, no, I didn't see most of them. So you'll have to start then.
Well, I didn't see a lot of them, but I did see Marriage Story, which I thought was amazing. So I probably would have voted for that one.
Okay. Pick your next victim.
Chad.
Oh, thanks. So I confess I didn't watch the Oscars, and I don't follow up too much on movies. So I'm not sure what was up there for it, but I did see Joker, so I'm a bit of a superhero movie fan, and I did think it was an interesting take, but I don't know how it stacks to the rest of them. But that's the only one that comes to mind. We'll head over to Mark and just see what he thinks.
Yeah, I saw a few. Actually, I think my favorite movie of the year wasn't nominated for Best Picture, but it was nominated for Best Screenplay, which was Knives Out. If you like detective movies, I highly recommend it.
All right, you get to pick somebody.
How about Sarah?
I did not watch the Oscars either, but I did see a couple of the movies, and recently, which I'm honestly not sure if it's sort of a Oscar winning category, although they did win it for Best Actress is Little Women. It was a really wonderful movie. I really enjoyed it. And really good costumes, great acting. I don't know about like a Best Actress, Best Actor category, but it was a beautiful movie. I will pass it to Valto.
Yeah, I would say that I went to see Joker with my son, and I really liked. I think that performance was pretty wild. As a movie, it's quite crazy overall, but overall, I think that definitely the character, how that went, definitely on my books, yes. So I'll call to Avery. Popcorn question about Oscars.
What would you have voted for Best Movie?
I don't even know what the options were. I have no idea.
So tell us about a movie that you saw that really resonated with you.
I have no idea. I don't watch movies. I watch really bad movies on airplanes, and that makes me really happy. So I loved Hobbs and Shaw, the new Fast and Furious movie. That's exactly what I like to watch on an airplane. Nothing resonating, no crying, just ridiculous.
Actually, I'll have to confess that I enjoyed that movie too.
Right? So, it was good.
Yeah. What I really appreciate, because I think those of us in the U.S. Really forget that the Oscars are very U.S. centric. So this year to see an Asian foreign film win was really amazing. I also love The Farewell, which is every encounter with my family, maybe. So it's lived out on the big screen. So that was really cool that won some awards too. So I love that as we do the work with ecosystem building, Chad and Volta are not in the US, and we get to hear some amazing perspectives that are not in the US. And yes,
Yeah.
conveners. Yes. So as people who are based here-ish sometimes, because you are always like all over the place, which is exciting. So I think that's a lot to speak to this goal in particular about connected networks. So with that, I'm going to hop off because I've got to get on another call. Valto and Chad, at the end of the call, if you will put in your takeaways and stuff on the agenda is great, but on that new document that we created, that would be great too. So I leave you in good hands. I'm going to be the vanishing mediator and slowly step out of the room.
Great, thanks. And hello, and thanks for that great intro. So we're having a bit of an email chat before this and looking through some of the initiatives for the goal. And one of the ones that came up that is kind of top of mind for me at the moment is a shared events counter for a region. And that's one of the things that connects people around a region is these events. It's really interesting as we do the work, the difference in events, particularly within a dense area, whether you have a town of 6,000, which maybe has one or two entrepreneurial or innovation type events a month. And also within those regions, how some of the meetup groups or the organizations putting on events may be more general. So you'll have a business networking breakfast type that may have an entrepreneur related aspect to it once every 2 or 3 events, as compared to a major city center, which has events really niching down. So they have something for entrepreneurs, for artificial intelligence entrepreneurs, for artificial intelligence entrepreneurs from Asia working on medtech. So really, really getting focused. And then we start looking at, well, how do we then, at a broader level, coordinate some of these events? And how do we not double up? And you run into some ecosystems, especially early days, where you've got like 5 business model canvas sessions happening on a Tuesday, and it's like, well, how do we really support at a holistic level the development of our entrepreneurs? So these are some of the thoughts that I've been having. I know, Valto, you and I have spoken about this a bit with some of the great work happening at Startup Commons. There's a lot of really great platforms out there to solve some of these situations. What I'd love to walk through is just my own journey from running an innovation hub and trying to coordinate this, not just for my hub, but for my region in a town of 200,000 just outside of Brisbane. And then what I've encountered as far as seeing other platforms come up and where we're currently at in Australia, and then open up for comments and conversations on what you guys are experiencing. So what I'll do is I will share screen. So there, and pull up that. And there. So everybody can see that okay? If you know, it's great. So I ran Fire Station 101, which is an innovation hub out of Ipswich. We were the first innovation hub fully owned and operated by a local government, a local council. In Australia, we have 3 levels of government: state, federal, and local. And so a local government came along and said, well, we think economic diversification is important. We see this whole startup gig type thing happening. Let's create an innovation hub. And so I ran that for about 1.5 years. And as I did it, we're about 50 minutes outside of the main city of Brisbane, inland. And so we're definitely not regional or rural, as some towns would consider themselves, but we're also, for people in the city, having to drive 50 minutes to an event outside the city can seem like they're going regional. So what I did is first I started mapping out in Excel, just very crudely, what am I running? What are the different things? So there's things, I considered what I was doing in 3 categories. So first I had 101 sessions. So business model 101, taxation 101, so just general, how do I run a business? How do I start up? Potentially even investment 101. I then also did technology sessions. So things about virtual reality or drones or artificial intelligence or data, things that they may not get anywhere else. And then I ran what I called communities of practice. And so we're going to talk about agriculture. We're going to talk about defense. We're going to talk about things where people would gather together as a community. Because one of the things that we discovered around these meetups, around these groups that were happening, is they create their own little community, their own identity. Quite often we have these innovation hubs, but an innovation hub is just simply a physical container for these communities that are already happening. I was always conscious that Fire Station 101 was a community, but we also need to be open to invite other communities in and not be exclusive. And so I started mapping out when we were running these events. I then also kept track of every other meetup, every hub, every group, every council chamber that was around my vicinity within about 100-mile radius, and said who's running what. And so I kept track of those. And so that way, when I had an event, I knew what I was doubling up onto. So I didn't want to try and cannibalize the audiences. How do we all work together? It was a great system, and it took me about 8 hours every Sunday. So it was like an extra day just to try and coordinate my events in the region. It was painful. It was worthwhile while I kept it up for the 3 or 4 months while I did it, and then life happened. And so it is a dedicated responsibility. I then tried, this isn't mine, it's just a Google search for Google Shared Calendar, because I don't have any screen grabs at the time, but I then briefly tried a Google Shared Calendar and getting everybody to contribute. The challenge with this is it does require everybody to use Google Calendar. Then how do we differentiate between things that are events and things that are not? Other people in the ecosystems I've spoken to that have tried this approach, it just doesn't work. It breaks down fairly rapidly. I haven't seen anybody who maintains it on a regular basis, but it is one path that people think, well, this might be something to go for. What we've then seen are certain platforms come up where they do this work for us, because as a species, whenever we have problems, we develop systems to solve those problems. So this is an example of Tech Sydney. It's built on a platform called Ramen Life, which is managed by Joe out of Sydney, and he is going out there to others. I've had people ping from across the pond, even in America, where Joe's reaching out to saying, hey, look, do you want to use our platform? So it is an interesting approach. It keeps track of the startups, keeps track of the programs. You start getting these aggregators out there. I'm not quite sure how he's getting the data, whether the organizations actually have to submit their data to a central platform. There's also things like Casey's SourceLink, which is a fantastic platform to be able to grab a collection of data in. And so they're good value as well. And they also keep track of deep heuristics underneath. So I was thinking about all of this when I took over the role as a Global Entrepreneurship Network Managing Director for Australia. And then Global Entrepreneurship Week was coming up. And I'm thinking, I took the role in September. How do we track all events across the nation? I don't have the budget to create and embed, get everybody on board with something like Tech Sydney's Ramen Life or bring Casey's SourceLink in. And I don't have the time or the capability to build something of my own. So how do we track events? And then I realized that a lot of events are on platforms such as Eventbrite or Meetup. They're fairly common ones. There's other ones that are emerging. We have things such as, just for a few examples, sticky tickets. There's Humanitix, which is giving proceeds to causes. So there's all sorts of different ones, but Meetup and Eventbrite are the two of the main ones that you see, along with Facebook. And then which ones could I access through an API? So Facebook is a bit of a challenge, but Meetup and Eventbrite are doable. So I pinged into Meetup and Eventbrite. Eventbrite requires you to link to the organizer, so you do have to create that link when you search, but Meetup does allow you to do keyword search. So I created some, excuse me, I created some keyword searches for Meetup, startup, pitch, innovation, entrepreneur, and I think one or two other keywords. And they also then allow you to do it within a 100-mile radius of a region. So I did our major metro cities in the top of tail, the corners of Australia. And it says, what do you got? And the result was for last year, 535 events. So what I have now, which I'll show you, is just a very crude calendar using open source software, which is on a regular basis pulling down events from Meetup and Eventbrite. which I'll load up here. So we can search for one of our states, so Queensland, which is one I'm in. And you can just see the events that are coming up. And so just a few lessons learned from that process. It does take curation. So you could do this for your city, poking into the city and then start pulling up, but you do have to start going through and creating a system to exclude certain ones, especially if you do it on keyword search, and then map those event organizers to the API that you actually pull down. But it does, you can access a lot of the deep information about the event. The main reason for doing this is mostly for organizers, because I don't expect startups to come in here and say, well, what am I going to attend tonight? What are my options? They probably will just search Eventbrite or Meetup directly for those, or be involved in their community. But it is pretty powerful to then to be able to, for organizers to say, well, I'm going to run something in my region. What do I have? And then we can even filter down even further, such as if I search for virtual reality, to say, okay, I'm going to run a VR event. What kind of VR events are run in my region for that time? And here's the ones I run across the nation of Australia at the moment. You know, we've got a population of combined of a few states of the US, and so I expect similar kind of density and events happening in the US. So that's just an example of an approach that I've had over coming through on creating a common events calendar. It is a challenge common to all, but I'd love to open it up now for questions and just an open discussion on how we use events to bring our communities together and how we track that for our own ecosystems.
Thank you, Chad. That was really helpful to see that. I don't know, you and I don't think have really crossed paths much, so I'm not sure if you're familiar with conveners.org and what we do. But we're a global association of conferences that are all focused on impact. One of the things we've been running for the last 6 years is a global events calendar. I would say our target audience is the same in terms of event organizers, like that is who we build it for. But it's also, we're not targeting just general entrepreneurial events. So there is a pretty big difference in terms of what kind of content we're trying to get on there. But we generally list about 1,200 to 1,400 impact-focused conferences around the world each year. And that is an extremely manual process. We use Event Calendar Pro on WordPress to actually list it. And then we manually update every entry. And they're pretty lightweight, but we don't have the tech skills on our team to be able to think about things like API integrations and stuff like that. So that is a process that Sarah manages and has been deeply, deeply familiar with.
Yeah, that's great. So is it mostly focused on major conferences that you do?
Yeah, they're mostly, I mean, probably as small as some 50-person-ish events. The larger ones are, 5,000 to 6,000. Yeah. And it is one of the things, especially with larger, and actually the process I've gone through, I've found that I'm missing a lot of the larger events because I don't use Meetup or Eventbrite. They dedicated bespoke systems. And so keeping track of that can be a challenge. We have a couple of organizations in Australia keeping track of the major events just for Australia. But even on a global perspective, it's a huge value. I'm on an organizing committee for a couple of these large ones, like you have the Global Entrepreneurship Congress, the Global Entrepreneurship Summit, these ones where you go to 2 or 3 major events a year, and how do they all line up? And then scheduling these out over time can be a real challenge. And by the same token, on the real small side, I'm also really interested in how we track communities, because quite often when you see the growth of these ecosystems, going back to the core fundamental of some of the goals that we're in currently,
building these communities, building this connectivity. It often starts with, Silicon Beach on Sunshine Coast in Australia, where a bunch of coders got together 10 years ago and said, look, let's just sit on the beach and code.
Yeah.
And that was like the birth, or, you hear Brad Feld talk about just getting in his living room with a bunch of investors, say, hey, what do you reckon? Like really watching the birth of these things from these smaller meetups and grow. And how do we track that and watch the evolution? But love to chat with you after on kind of integrations and then some of the work that Balto's doing. Curious as far as, as he's looking to open source and how do we solve some of these common challenges for all ecosystems?
Yeah, maybe I can comment on that. So of course, I think this goes a bit also to some of the very underlying challenges and problems that we have in kind of organizing ourselves as ecosystem builders and developers and those who kind of care for our communities and larger than communities on the ecosystem level is how could we kind of solve that challenge of not duplicating efforts. So that's the right, like the underlying problem is that because we have kind of this dual problem that there are platforms out there where it feels that it's, well, why would you need to think so complex, and let's just put a shared Google Calendar up and we can manage with that, and it works for a while until it breaks.
Right.
And then we have like hundreds of community managers and ecosystem builders doing that same 100-time failure over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, when we, on the other hand, say we don't have technical skills, we don't have, we don't have enough resources, we don't have enough money, but the reality is that we do, but we just waste it in these kind of scattered hundreds of small efforts instead of doing that together and pooling technical skills, operative skills, documenting skills, data gathering skills. And we should just kind of find a way to think of that. And then when we first kind of can accomplish that mindset and we can get a center to kind of emerge. Center, I don't mean around Kaufman, or I don't mean around any community specifically, but a center for the problem. So we put the problem in the center, we join that center, and we make that open source, meaning that it's not proprietary. Nobody owns it. Everyone who contributes to it can use it. If there needs to be some coordination to kind of make sure that progress happens. But then if the direction doesn't please, it's like open source software. You can just take the whole thing, fork it, and formalize a new group or two groups, which of course is not optimal because we don't want to disperse the resources again. But I think that is and that same problem repeats itself around number of shared problems and topics, where this calendar case is a very good one, because I think that's one of the cases where everyone understands that it can't be solved without some technical solution in the mix. So it cannot be purely just updating Google Documents and Google Calendars. At the same time, it's super simple from the amount of information that needs to be kind of captured. So that's more of a kind of my vetting of the frustrations that kind of like, if somehow we could kind of jointly together decide that let's not do this anymore. Like, we who have experienced and understand this, let's stop that and help others from not wasting and experience the same failure over and over again. So what can we do about it? I think that would be a good conversation to have, if you have some ideas as well.
We had kind of a similar struggle where we do syndicate our calendar so that other people can just host it and don't have to do all the manual entry that we do. The problem is that not everybody cares about the global perspective. And so, like, one of the development features that one day in a world where we have the resources to do things was that allowing people to either host a sub version of the calendar that's either by region or audience or issue area, right? Like all the women's focused events around the world, or just all the events in Australia, right? Like, could folks host something that already like has that filter selected, so that the target audience that comes to their website is not filtering through 1,400 global events? They're looking at what's relevant to them. And that's just, Valda, I couldn't agree more with the resources are out there. We're just fragmenting them so heavily that we're duplicating efforts over and over. And I'm really curious, Chad and Heidi, or Mark and Heidi, what kind of where this work lands with you all, and the role of events and calendaring in your work.
Yeah. Absolutely. Before I answer in, Heidi, I'd love to hear from your perspective on either in your community or the work that you're doing, and what you do with regards to events. I don't think you're on, Heidi. You might be on mute.
Okay, I'm on mute. Unmuted. So we have some events, but most of the time what I'm seeing is like event notices that come to me, and then I share them with our communities, not our communities, but our regions, and then they pick and choose what they want to attend or what they want to participate in. Because most of our events are more internal. We do have some externally focused events. So like I'm working right now with the Aspen Institute and a few other partners on this event we're calling the Rural Opportunity and Development Summit, which is going to be a huge summit on people who are involved in basically ecosystem building for rural communities. So that's one thing that, I could see needing a place to put that so everybody hears about it. And Avery, maybe that's something for me to forward to you. And so, it sounds like, Avery, like what you're doing is really aggregating all of these, globally, but also maybe, I would include stuff that I'm doing in the rural opportunity, building areas. So I would love to just be able to send you whatever stuff I get, and hopefully you can integrate it into your tool already existing.
Yeah, Sarah, did you want to speak to that?
Heidi, my internet cut out a little bit, so I wasn't able to hear the whole explanation. But I did hear you mention that you're partnering with Aspen for a rural-focused convening, right? And I think I saw the newsletter in the Andy newsletter. I get it every month. I saw that as well. So the question, Avery, was about our accelerator program that we're designing.
No, about the calendar and how forwarding and things work, so that Heidi can help channel things she hears about to us.
Basically, Heidi, the easiest way on your side is just to forward me whatever materials that you want posted to the Global Calendar events page. We also have a button on the our global calendar on our website, and I can send you the link to just simply add the event directly. But if you don't have the bandwidth, I've been doing this for over a year now, so I'm more than happy to just shoot it up there. We also have a wonderful consultant who helps me coordinate the events calendar now. And so if I don't have the bandwidth, she can get it up immediately. And then what we do in coordination with the Global Events Calendar is we have a monthly newsletter that goes out to all of our convening partners, both paying members and just the community in general. And every single month we showcase all the most relevant events that are happening in that month all over the world. So I would be more than happy to feature it in our next newsletter, which goes out the first week of every month.
Right, yeah, so I would love your contact information and to be able to see what that events calendar looks like, and just to be able to forward to you things that come across my desk or email or wherever I see things. And it's all rural related. It's all
That's great.
Rural economic development stuff. So I'd be happy to send it over to you.
Perfect. I just sent you in the chat my email address. Thank you.
Cool. And if you can put in the chat, Avery and Sarah, the links to the calendar and the organization and what you do, just so we capture that.
Yeah, I can do that.
I'm already on
That'd be
it.
great.
Thank you.
And we also have, I mean, it's a couple years old now. I can share my screen. We have a, so this is the calendar itself, which is also not the nicest user interface. It is the Events Calendar Pro kind of WordPress thing, but you can, you can view it as a list, or you can do the calendar view as well, and filter by like keywords or locations, things like that, and see, how many things are happening around the world. But we also we have some really interesting data from all of this that we've gathered. And so there was one year where we had enough resourcing to do an actual analysis of it and look at things like the current state of the impact convening ecosystem, and understand like, okay, like, hey, most are occurring in spring and fall, most happen on Thursdays, like here's the day of the week they're landing, here's how many days long most of these conferences are, how much they cost. And we have the underlying data where like you could even query the data to say like, okay, who are the $2,000 to $3,000 convenings, and what is that, like, what is the profile of those, who are they serving? We clearly have a bias in our calendar towards the US and the UK, but we do list more broadly. And so there's something to that too, like Valto, if you put that problem at the center and we're able to swarm it, then you also get these kind of unintended or surprising benefits that can come out of like robust data analysis and things that can actually start to speak to surfacing trends that you just can't see when the data is all fragmented.
Maybe I also comment in regards to the point that you mentioned from, I think, a couple of different perspectives. One was in regards to having like internal events versus kind of external events, and then the other part being like US centric or just local centric versus like global centric. So from like, if we think of building the technical solution together, it doesn't really matter kind of what the content there is from the perspective of where it's relevant. It matters from the content of from the perspective of kind of what we capture and what information we are able to distribute, but then what kind of specific areas and so forth are in question, then those are kind of a non-issue for collaboratively developing a solution that everyone can use. And then also, if thinking of kind of this aggregation approach, whether that information comes manually entered or whether it comes from platforms like Meetup and Eventbrite and Facebook and so forth, like Chad had made a great demo and a solution for that, or whether it is kind of like an API that takes an input that can be connected to any custom application, as long as they send the right type of file automatically from the system when they create or update. So the one thing is kind of data in, and you can imagine, just for the sake of simplicity, a big data pool somewhere, and then you can pull data out to different types of user interfaces or different applications that where it can be filtered at the time when it's kind of shown or populated into systems. So it's kind of these are, I would say, all of the reasons why we should kind of take the animal and slice it into small enough, the whole elephant into small enough pieces, but that kind of requires that collective focus for a long enough period of time without losing interest of solving the problem, and then enough of these different perspectives contributing kind of, okay, but our needs are like this, and then some other perspective that our needs and information is like that. So
yeah. And Balta, you and I have had a bit of chats around kind of data approaches and strategies for that. And you're absolutely right. It does take a bunch of people working together with that trust and to be able to keep that focus. And events, and under the goal for connected networks is one part of it. Also mapping out the ecosystem itself and understanding that is another one. Hearing different approaches quite often there's three ways to go about it. And Avery and Sarah, hearing you share, it's this progression of centralized, where one person, or maybe they start building out their team, starts collecting all the data and getting it in, which can be pretty time consuming, but it's high on quality because it's curated, you know exactly what's going in. It also means you don't have to get too sophisticated about your systems because you're the only one using it. At a minimum level, Excel spreadsheets, which you can upload, or getting into WordPress plugin stuff. You can then get decentralized and ask other people to do it. That's one of the challenges I have with the Global Entrepreneurship Network and Global Entrepreneurship Week, is it does ask all the other hubs and organizations to add their data to the Gen calendar. And look, like you know, when you're running a hub, like even asking somebody to do 2 more minutes worth of anything to help your needs for your calendar, it's just painful.
We had a dream once upon a time that people would be adding their own stuff to the calendar. And
Yeah.
that did not turn out to be true. I mean, even when they did, it was that variable quality piece that just, the curation is what actually I think makes it more usable.
Absolutely.
And we've done another version of this. So like there's a big difference between events, which have a high degradation speed, right? Like they're turning over relatively quickly. Like maybe you know about them for a year in advance if it's a big conference, but in general, like the rate of change of the data is quite high. And we have another tool we built that we're just relaunching now called the Impact Accelerator Map, which is a similar centralized repository of, I think, 1,200 or so impact-focused accelerators. But their data doesn't degrade as quickly, right? Like it's about the existence of a company that runs programs. We're not listing the specific programs they run. And that was a real design decision because of the amount of time and energy is required when you have any information that is going to degrade quickly. If it's like application deadlines or the need to check that and refresh that, unless you can crack some sort of web scraping or automation piece. And this is part of what frustrates me, where we know there's all these incredible technology tools that the private sector is using all the time to optimize stealing our attention or getting us to play that next stupid mobile game or whatever. Why can't we leverage some of these things that have already been built to be able to help build stronger community and help people navigate ecosystems and like do this high impact work? That's my little soapbox. Sorry, I'll step back off a bit now.
It's a good question, but I don't think it does exist, actually. I think the problem is as hard as we think it is.
Okay.
And I've discovered that because I had the same thought. Surely there's something out there. And when I started poking, like I said, Eventbrite and Meetup are the 2 of the simplest ones to automatically get into. But for everything else, the data in the world is still, that is why it's a big data problem. It is still so siloed and disparate and pockets everywhere. And everyone's popping up saying, surely it's easy. And they get 30% of the way into a platform and we see them go away.
Yeah.
And so that's why, like for me, I'm just keep poking and poking. Facebook's really hard. I'm probably never going to crack that one. But I think that Facebook, if somebody does an event on Facebook, I haven't seen too many that exclusively use that for events. Quite often they do also post it then on Eventbrite or Meetup. You then have, like I said, a few other mid-tier ones, Humanitics.
How many of ours are actually on Eventbrite? Like,
say again?
I was asking Sarah if she has a sense of how many of our events on there are actually on Eventbrite. It's like almost none.
No,
They're all websites of these events.
Yeah.
Yeah. The bigger ones I would imagine would be, because they need that dedicated branding and control.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, and I'd be interested in everyone's thoughts on moving forward on, you know, apart from putting like Deal Room or like there's 2 or 3 centralized mapping platforms. You know, the Tech Sydney one, Ramen Life is one, SourceLink is another good one. Deal Room is another one where but they also still require a centralized team to curate and add. Again, that second option of having a decentralized approach and trying to find the incentives for people. Avery, you nailed it in that, like, nobody has a user story of, as a facilitator, I want to update your platform. Like, that statement just doesn't exist in the real world. So how do we then add functionality or add value propositions or incentives to get people to add their data? And the third one is through automation. And I think those tools are coming into play. And the really good thing, exciting thing about that, and I love what you said as far as getting into the research behind it, as also an academic working on his PhD, looking at research potential from data. I'm really excited about, getting in there and seeing how do meetup groups grow over time. What is the start and the end rate of some of these communities? What is the role and influence of major conferences in inspiring a region? Like I said, I'm on a couple of committees, and the long-term value of what that does to a region is incredible. Being able to tie in your data to that is pretty powerful, which then helps raise awareness on why these are important for connected communities.
Right.
So I guess in the last 15 minutes or so, we'll throw the question out there to everyone. And Heidi, from an end person's perspective on coordinating, where to from here? What's next in the next, say, 6 months for using events and maybe a shared curated calendar or a common events repository for enhancing more connected communities?
Mm-hmm.
Wait, you're asking me? I don't know. I don't have an answer. Maybe somebody else does.
Maybe Mark, do you have something to contribute from the perspective of the whole topic? What has been your thoughts over this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think this issue for me is like I have like the inverse issue, which is that I work with 20 ecosystem builders across 18 states in the U.S., all in rural communities, where they're desperate for more events, and there may only be, as Chad mentioned, one event a month, if that. And so, I think one of the things that I'm always trying to figure out is how to connect either the ecosystem leaders or the entrepreneurs within their ecosystem to ideas and collaborators that are actually outside of their community, because that's a really fruitful way of supporting and sparking entrepreneurship and innovation. And so I was like thinking, I'd never really thought about this, but like it doesn't seem like there's we have Meetup, and I don't know which is for, and of course the topic of the event is for local events in your community, but there doesn't seem to be a platform for like helping people connect across virtual events, which would actually be something that I think would be really valuable and exciting to the communities that I work with, because they just have limited opportunities often to learn and meet others, just because of the geographic isolation and small size of their communities.
And I'm curious, Mark, if and bandwidth may be an issue here, but if there is a market for being able to access more virtual events, because there are a lot of interest. Like I know in our field, like the impact community, like there's things like Impact Entrepreneur doing, there's lots of webinars and kind of virtual convenings that are happening.
Yeah.
That are a little bit more cross-pollinating, and I'm wondering if that's an avenue for folks in that more rural context to get to that critical mass of.
Is there a platform where those are posted? I mean, how do people find it?
Of course there isn't.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's.
But wouldn't that be beautiful if there was?
That would be really cool. I mean, it made me. It got me as we were having the conversation. I was like, why doesn't this exist yet? Like, you would think.
No business model for it. There's fundamentally no business model for it.
Yeah.
Like this is a straight up nonprofit grant for a thing that's going to need maintenance forever, right? Like there is nothing. And with more and more foundations moving to this, like we don't fund stuff unless they're sustainable and have an ongoing revenue model. Like I'm sorry, isn't that like, if you wanted us to be for profits, then wouldn't we just go do that? Like, isn't that kind of the point? And so I think things like this, it is a tragedy of the commons almost kind of issue, that ends up being.
I have been seeing, so in my curation, or in the poll for Meetup, there are a few virtual only meetups that are happening where they do their webinars and they post them. Same thing with Eventbrite. And they're using Eventbrite to schedule virtual ones. The other one, and Mark, it's an interesting concept. It's actually the topic for my PhD, is what is the role of the hub, using the term loosely, in building resilience in rural and regional communities. And I do some work in towns from 600 to 6,000, 3 to 10 hours away from the metro area. And one of the things, particularly in Australia, because we're a regional country, I mean, within Queensland, 50% of our population and economic generation is outside of the metro area, from agri to mining. And one of the things that we're working on is how do we replicate what you automatically get from density? Density, you're going to get the serendipitous collisions, you're going to get the new ideas, you get all of that. You go outside, we can get that same thing, but we have to artificially construct it. We actually have to be intentional about getting the things that automatically happen and we don't have to think about, we can be lazy about in metro areas. And so some of those things are roving mentors, so like an entrepreneur residence for the region. You always have that leader, such as yourself, who acts as a virtual hub, as it were, but then equipping you with people on a monthly basis. And so one of the things we're creating is a roster of a whole bunch of mentors. And once a year, they will commit 2 or 3 days to then popping into a region of choice, such as yours, or down in Port Lincoln, which is way outside of Adelaide, or, and they'll spend 2 or 3 days with you. And for those 2 or 3 days, you just go around. And then each of those communities contributes, $500, $1,000, $2,000, whatever it is. And so it could be a 5 to 10K endeavor, maybe 7 to 8 worth of cost, 1 to 2 to wash your face. You do a few of those a year, and that's a bit of base funding to keep you going. And so creating that business model, as Avery mentioned, around how do we artificially construct that meetup thing, and then that then gets posted on from newsletters to Meetup to Eventbrite to have both the physical representation, but then also we could potentially record that so people who couldn't be there, who are kind of the remote to the rural. So you got your rural area, town of 6,000, and then that farmer Joe who lives like 2 hours away from that. And he's like, well, I'm your worst case. But I'd be interested in your thoughts on those different kind of models and what you see emerging for managing events and what you do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of what the model that we're trying to develop as an organization, because we're really the organization that serves the ecosystem leaders in these communities. And so how do we facilitate that through a network that is bringing that kind of, whether it's roaming mentors or entrepreneurs or resident, that sort of intentionally constructed, entrepreneurial environment that, I live in Boston. It's everywhere here, right? It's like the center of that. So I think it's an interesting question. And I think, but given the role that meetups and events play in that system, I think, how do we bring rural people, even if it's like a group of rural people in a hub that's connecting to another event somewhere else, because they don't have somebody with the expertise and lean startup in their community, but they need to learn and connect with those ideas. I think that those are the kind of questions that I, in a way that's more than just watching a webinar that's already been recorded, but that can be engaging and they can build relationships and things like all the benefits that you're not going to get all of the benefits from being there in person, but could we get some of them?
Yeah, I do think in rural communities, like one of the ways to engage the rural community that is to sort of meet them where they are. So if there is a sort of natural gathering place, maybe it's a church or a library or, I don't know, whatever, a bar, is have your events there. So they're already there. You're not trying to artificially force them to come to an event, which I think doesn't work as well.
Yeah, that third space is really important. And one of the things I found, like I started my research into innovation hubs in regional areas. But one of the things that I always struggled with is even when I ran my hub, I had at a given time 70 to 80 members in a town of 200,000. But on a given day, I might have 2 or 5 people in there. Because in regional areas, they just, you don't have the desire, like you're comfortable working from home. And if I'm actually in a hub, that means I'm not with my customers and running my business. But what I did find is they come in for the once or twice checkups in a given month, or on a weekly basis come in for a major event that I was holding. And what I started really rapidly discovering is the church model fits quite well with what we're talking about here, because you think about a church, physical space, empty most of the time. They come in for the major Sunday service. They might have their home group in their own area, on their day of the week for their particular tribe, whether it's youth, whether it's older, but whatever that is. And so then community plays such a huge part of it. Third space is important, whether it's a virtual or physical third space. So oftentimes those webinars, even here, we're creating a bit of a third space. It's not work, it's not home, but we're kind of creating community as we talk around a common topic. And then I guess what started off this conversation then is how do we let people know about it? Because quite often these kind of things happen because somebody taps somebody on the shoulder and, hey, do you want to come to this thing? But that's so reliant on our network. And Mark, the work you do with equipping the leaders to do that work is even one step further removed. And so you may know of something really good happening, but then you're trying to get that through the person who's really time poor and struggling to make ends meet down to the entrepreneur who really needs this. And so that's kind of, and then people like Avery and Sarah and Walter look at this and say, well, how do we automate it and create a tool for everybody to do their jobs better? We can be encouraged that it's complex. There is an answer, but also challenged because we're still trying to crack it, which I guess is one of the points of these calls. So if somebody can come up with a solution for that, that'd be great in the next 4 minutes. That'd be, if you could, thanks.
Well, I don't think if the solution can come up so easily, but I think that is it would be like if we just think like what would be like the beginning steps, like what would be the baby steps towards actually realistically believing that the solution can come out of the other end. So like if we already know what is the kind of the core of the problem is that dispersed kind of focus and like going back to our own stuff and then kind of coming back and then, okay, yeah, we have this shared problem and then going back to kind of solving the local own problems again. That's kind of like what type of dialogue should happen around, like where should that problem be sitting? Where would people put that? Should it be like in these calls? I don't think it can be here all the time, the topic. So like where it should live and who should take part and how we can show progress, how do we measure progress? Like I think it starts from those types of things, and this actually relates a bit on what I was thinking, like what new things we could bring to this ESHIP calls and what to kind of drive as new kind of, everything is a draft, but maybe we can come up with something also more result oriented and progress oriented for kind of considering the ESHIP years and the steps. There should be something delivered, I guess, if we think the ESHIP event format. So what would be kind of something concrete? So a little bit of rambling, but my point really being that what can we do to start making progress?
Well, so that's a great point. What I'd love to do, even with the 5 of us that are on this call as we prepare for the June session. Look, I'm happy to share Sarah and Avery with regards to the tech work I've done, even some of the tech resources that I have to be able to tap in, maybe some of the smaller events, Meetup and Eventbrite, tapping into those. And then also taking advantage of some of the larger conference type work. We can work together on a business model and then test it even, Mark, through what does this mean for rural and regional areas, and maybe using your ecosystem builders you have in your network and the ones that we have in Australia as a kind of a 2-country comparison on practically on the ground. What does this mean and how can we help? Maybe if we do a bit of a, using the framework for these calls, a canvas around this project, we share it around amongst us and we say, what could we do in 2 or 3 months to make a real dent in the challenge? What do you guys think about that approach?
Is there any, just to check that, is there anything, any like canvas or goal, sub goals happening around event?
There's a canvas that was written around this. Originally, Co-Starters Engineers was going to team up to be able to do this. When it was clear that Kaufman wasn't actually moving forward in any way with resources to support the effort, we had to deprioritize it. Like that's, we've already got a lot of commitments, and unless we can financially support the team time to do this, like we can't keep volunteering to do this stuff for free. And so, and I think that there's also a piece here where we share your infrastructure requirement, but I don't think we share the content. I think the Venn diagram of our content is pretty low overlap. And so, in terms of Kaufman's focus or the ESHIP focus for events that are specifically focused around entrepreneurship, cool. We might do things that focus on social entrepreneurship, but our audience is not targeting entrepreneurship more broadly. And so it doesn't help us to do a bunch of work to like do integrations, because that'll just add noise to our data set, unless there is some of that technical upgrades in terms of the filtering and the capability that allow each website to host the facet of the larger database that is appropriate to their audience. So I'd be very keen if there's an interest in like going after some grant funding or something to do the technical development lift. But I think in terms of the data sharing piece, we're probably not going to be able to prioritize this right now.
Yeah. So yeah, from my perspective, that sounds like even more work on the canvas on finding a business model that supports this. We know the problem and we know some of the solutions, but then how do we support the development of it? I'm currently self-funding what I do and pick up gigs here and there in order to help keep the progress going. So a few more questions and answers to the process, but it's good to know that people are both sharing the challenge and working on different aspects of it.
And of course, I think that it's good to also think other people looking at this from the recording and welcoming, any input and ideas also like afterwards. It doesn't matter, this problem doesn't go away, after this call. If someone watches this 6 months from here, happy to hear those ideas also at that point.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So to wrap up, we've got a few topics for next time. And so we'll look at getting some speakers in there. I know that a few of them that came on, rural ecosystem builders, who are they? Incorporating the arts and culture into building entrepreneur ecosystems, and how are we creating an ecosystem of support for entrepreneurs in terms of self-care for founders. So we'll float a few of those, and on the side, just keep working on the event side of things and see what we can do for there.
Beautiful. Thank you guys. Great to see you.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. See ya.
Bye.